Freja is Overwatch 2's newest DPS character, and she can be a little bit daunting. She's this weird DPS dive sniper hybrid, and utilizing her kit can feel a little bit daunting. So we're going to be simplifying that entire process of how you actually play Freja by breaking down her kit, giving the fundamentals of how her kit actually functions, as well as some tips and tricks, and then a live gameplay review of me demonstrating both the good and the bad of Freja at the Masters level. For context, my name is Spilo. I've been an Overwatch coach for over 7 years now, coaching bronze players all the way up to the Overwatch League, and I've put in 50 hours of my own in Freja, as well as coaching her a handful of times. And we're going to be taking all of that information and putting it into the most digestible, comprehensive Freja guide out there. Let's get started. So for context here, Freja is a dive sniper hybrid. She utilizes her mobility to give herself advantages as a sniper. So what that means is that you're going to be playing primarily medium to longer ranges, but that you don't just stand boots on the ground and spam from a long distance. There are a lot of other DPS characters that just do that better. And in fact, it can be very risky to do that if you're playing versus actual snipers like Widowmaker and Hanzo. If I'm peeking here as Freja and there's a Widowmaker or Hanzo that sees me, the chances of them killing me are pretty high. At least it's not a very fair fight. But at the same time, you may not always want to be hard flanking all the way in backline and just jumping on top of backline, because you're not a Genji, you're not a Sombra, you're not a Tracer, you're not a Reaper. So a lot of it is utilizing that mobility to give yourself better angles to shoot targets. That is the key aspect of Freja. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to utilize my updraft to take high ground, and then that way I have a better vantage point to be able to spam tank or spam backline. And even if there isn't a high ground, and this is really important, you're utilizing your updraft to hide behind tall structures to give yourself peeker's advantage on snipers or long range characters. What that might mean is that if I'm this Widowmaker here, if I'm the tank bot here and this is a Widowmaker, and I'm aiming my crosshair at the Freja here, and all of a sudden the Freja appears here and spams bolts down on me, that is a really difficult duel for even a good Widowmaker to win. You can see where her crosshair is and where I actually am is really tricky, whereas I know exactly where she is. So when I updraft, I'm already peeking directly at her. You do this and you marry that with her dash spam. So let's talk a little bit about what bolt usage actually looks like. Bolts are the alternate fire, which are a stick damage and then explosive AoE damage. And it's pretty darn good. If you hit 2 of those things, that's going to kill 250 HP targets. But the crucial thing is that even if you miss when you use this bolt spam, it provides splash damage. So when I hit the floor, I don't have updraft here because it just hit my head in the ceiling. That's awesome. When I utilize my updraft here, even if I miss my shots after utilizing my dash spams, it's actually still doing splash damage on the floor. And not only does that do damage for misses, it also means that I might force them into a predictable strafe pattern. So that first explosive there, if I'm doing that from here, where do you think that tank bot's gonna move? Well, he's gonna move to my left to avoid the explosion on the ground, which then means that my next bolt shot might be a little bit easier to hit because I know where he's going, and so on. So what ends up happening is that you utilize this updraft to give yourself a bit of a peeker's advantage. Shoot, 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 but the second and third shots might actually be easier to hit because they're now moving predictably off of your explosive bolts. If you haven't noticed yet, dash indeed reloads your alternate fire automatically. Now your alt fire reloads on its own. If you're just spamming primary fire, no problem with that. But obviously when you're utilizing your updraft, you really want to unload all the damage that you can off of that cooldown, because this is really where you're most lethal. So you want to pump as much damage as you possibly can. So generally what a gameplay loop may look like is that you're going to either use your updraft to take high ground or use your updraft to give yourself some verticality on a wall. Then you're going to use your alternate fire and dashes to pump out as much spam damage, usually on a squishy, as you possibly can. Once you've done with that, if you can just spam your primary fire and mix in some bolts while you're waiting for your next updraft, waiting for your next dash, or if you're on the floor, you can then take the opportunity to spam tank. And that's kind of what the gameplay loop of Freja looks like. Use your updraft either to take a better position or to kind of give yourself a peeker's advantage behind a wall. Spam your bolts with your dashes and alt fire, and then go back to a more predictable, more conservative pressure of just pressuring frontline and looking for opportunities. And that's basically it. Now, that gameplay loop may seem relatively simple, but obviously in execution, it's a lot more complicated. A lot of times with Freja, you're going to be moving around and choosing different angles depending on how the game goes. You also have to make the decision of how many dashes do I want to use. If I'm standing on a high ground and I'm at a risk of being dove, there's a chance I may not want to use all of my dashes because my dash is also my disengage tool, just in case I get dove. And finally, just to make things even more complex, Freja's positioning is not simple. Just simply taking a high ground or utilizing some verticality may seem simple, but let me pull something up here. I've got a screenshot of Rialto, and I just want to kind of demonstrate how complex Freja's position can actually be. So for context here, if we're stuck at this choke in Rialto and I'm playing, let's say, Cassidy here. We're stuck at this choke. This is the enemy team. I can poke on the front line just fine. Freja can do that too. I can take the left angle here. Freja can do that too. And maybe if I'm feeling really silly, I can go up the stairs as Cassidy and poke down on them, and Freja can do that too. So not super complicated. But where Freja gets really complex, and you can probably pick up on this, is Freja could stand behind this corner, updraft up, and poke down. Freya can stand in this high ground, updraft over the roof, and poke down, utilizing her dashes. Because Freya has a much longer range than Cassidy and some mobility, Freya can even go over the water here. This is going to be a bit off camera, but you're going to be able to see she could poke across the bridge here. A bit riskier, but she can absolutely do it. Because she has the verticality, because she has more mobility than Cassidy, she can actually go through this room here all the way to the Mega on coast side behind the building and poke from behind. So basically the thing that makes Freya a little bit daunting and overwhelming and a lot of fun is the fact that you can essentially take the number of angles that a normal DPS can take, heck, even certain dive DPS can take, and you essentially double that on almost every single map, especially maps with high grounds. And so you really have to be able to read in each situation what makes the most sense. Is there a Widowmaker that I need to deal with? Okay, so what's the best angle to deal with her? Am I getting good value in spamming tank? Should I just spam tank then? Oh, is there a fragile backline? Is there a dive DPS I need to be aware of? For example, I may not want to take this angle here if there's a Genji over here because he might kill me. But if the Genji's over here, then maybe I can actually go and take that angle. And so it becomes a very complicated decision-making process about which angle you take because there are so many options with Freya. Now, don't concern yourself too much because the good news is that you don't always have to make the optimal choice with Freya. What I'm doing is I'm encouraging you to think about some of the fundamentals that we're talking about here and in each moment decide what makes the most sense for Freya right now. And honestly, just go and experiment. You're gonna need to practice making the decisions in live time, and that's going to take a lot of repetitions and that's going to take a lot of failure. Be comfortable with making mistakes with this character because honestly, that's just exactly how learning works. To wrap things up for the fundamentals of Freya, essentially you're going to be utilizing your updraft to take high grounds or to give yourself peeker's advantage on squishy targets. Utilize your bolt spam, utilizing your dash to reset those bolts. And when you no longer have updraft or when you no longer have dashes, you can utilize a more conservative poke approach with just spamming your bolts and using your primary fire, which actually does pretty decent damage. Make sure that you're at least saving a dash or two if you need to disengage from something that might dive you. And if not, throw all of your cooldowns at the enemy front line and the enemy backline over and over and over again. You'll kind of notice that Freya is more of a tempo character. In other words, that she has timings of extreme power and then downtime where she's not as threatening as other DPS characters. Think of your dash spam as like a lethality of Echo Stickies or Ash's Dynamite, where there's a big burst of value and then a little bit more conservative pressure afterwards. Finally, for fundamentals, we'll talk about her ultimate. So her ultimate hinders targets if it hits the target directly. And if it hits the target directly, it provides an AoE suck that has explosive damage on the targets that are nearby. It's actually kind of tricky to land here. And I think the biggest thing with Freya's ultimate from a beginner standpoint is to just use it on anything that's close as often as you possibly can. There's a lot of risk, reward, and trial and error with this ultimate that I learned. So I think the best way of learning how to utilize it is just throw it on whatever's close to you and do so frequently until you get a better hang of exactly when and where you should be using it. It can be Matrix, it can be shielded, it can be Suzu'd, it can be cleansed, it can be faded, it can be avoided, it can be deflected. And there's obviously like a big cast time as well, which really kind of telegraphs that it's coming. So it can be a very difficult ultimate to use, but you get it back so quickly. For every 3 final blows, you get 25% ult charge. So don't worry so much about always securing kills with it. Just practice utilizing it and getting more comfortable with it. As of right now, you are not allowed to use your abilities during the ultimate. I've given some feedback that I hope that this changes because I think that one of the problems with Freya's ult is during the cast, you can very easily die. And because you're basically, not only is the cast time really long, it's really loud, but you're not allowed to dash or move or utilize your ability. So it's really easy to die. So just kind of keep that in mind. You want to be using it up close, but you don't want to die during the cast. So long story short, experiment with it. Don't overthink it. Practice it. Use it on tanks, use it on squishies, use it on immobile targets, use it on mobile targets mobile targets that have actually used cooldowns that you can maybe punish. Just use it. Okay, let's now get to the slightly more advanced aspects of her kit. Now that you've got the fundamentals of you're utilizing verticality when the map gives it to you, you're getting that gameplay loop of spamming your dashes and shooting your shots and saving a dash if you need to, and playing an appropriate range, as well as thinking about different angles. Now you need to start thinking a little bit more in detail here. So some of this is going to be new information. Sometimes this is going to be elaborating on old information. First things first, you need verticality in basically every single duel. I never ever want to peek a corner into a target that knows that I'm there without utilizing some form of verticality. And that can come through my updraft, that can come through utilizing my dash spam, which we'll get into a little more in detail. But the overall fundamental is that your advantage is your verticality. And so if you're not utilizing your verticality in a duel, you're kind of throwing. There's a lot of really flat maps in Overwatch, flashpoints, Koth sometimes. And so it can feel difficult to utilize updraft properly, but even just peeking a corner with updraft gives you a vantage point that makes it a little bit easier to hit your shot. There's one other detail that we didn't talk about as well, besides the splash damage, predictable strafing, and crosshair advantage. It's also the fact that yes, while updraft can throw off your aim because aiming down in Overwatch is hard, aiming up in Overwatch is also hard. And the crucial thing is that if you are the character that is practicing aiming down over and over and over again, again, it's not likely that the enemy team, or the enemy player, excuse me, has as much repetition aiming up. It's the same advantage of why double jumping over enemies' heads as Genji works, because yes, it's hard for you, but you've done it so many freaking times and they may not have. It's the same reason why blinking through people as Tracer works, because yes, it's disorienting for you, but it's just as disorienting for the enemy player, and you have actually practiced it. So really, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of utilizing verticality in your duels. Obviously, there are some exceptions. For example, if I have like the crit perk, I accidentally chose the wrong perk here. We'll talk more about perks later. I have wall hacks that kind of allows me to peek flat, but even then, I would probably still utilize your verticality. So when in doubt, if you have updraft, if you have free dashes and you're taking a duel, utilize your verticality as much as you possibly can. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next up, we'll talk about the ult as well, elaborate a little bit. So I just talked about just using your ult off of cooldown, and while that's true, I do think you can definitely plan out your ult ahead of time. Look at the enemy composition. Is there a Winston? A Winston without bubble is free ult value. You force primal, you can just straight up kill him. It's really easy to utilize. Is there a wrecking ball? Using your ult on a wrecking ball and then dash spamming to burn him down, absolutely really good. A hog overextends. Do they have a sniper? Do they have an Ana? Immobile characters are often really easy to hit even at longer ranges. Is there a dive character that might be easy to hinder after they've used cooldowns in you? Is there something on the map angle wise you can set up and hide and flank and wait for them to walk in and then ult them as an element of surprise? Basically, the ultimate rewards planning out ahead of time, similar to Dragonblade and Pulse Bomb, because it's not easy to utilize. It's not Kitsune Rush. It's not Ash with Bob. You can't just throw it and get value. You have to kind of plan it out ahead of time. And so while I initially encourage players to just use it, as you get better and more familiar with what works with a cooldown, you're going to be rewarded a lot for planning out ahead of time. I'm not necessarily saying that you always have to put everything on hold until you figure out how to use your ultimate, but it will be rewarded for thinking a little bit, strategizing just a little bit. Next up is obviously like the bolt spam is kind of like the gameplay loop, but obviously we talked about how utilizing saving a dash to just in case you need to reposition is really important. But I'm going to really emphasize that again. Utilizing your triple bolt spam is really good unless you want to change your angle or unless you're at risk of being dove. So sometimes what I'll utilize is if there's a risk of being a dive, I'll utilize my updraft and do 2 bolts. That should be enough for a one shot if I hit both, but then I'll save my dash for a little bit more pressure afterwards. So just keep in mind that Freja's positioning can happen rapidly. Again, we'll go more into that in VOD review with actual examples. Let's talk a little bit more about duels as well, because obviously like when we're talking about duels, talking about verticality alone isn't always good enough. Like what if you don't have updraft? Well, this is where it actually took a big learning curve for me to how to actually utilize, because when I was utilizing updraft, I was often very patient with my bolts, trying to very deliberately aim each one, which is really, really important. In fact, I probably should have put that in the fundamentals. You should be spamming your shots, like using your dashes to get bolt resets, but you shouldn't be just spamming your shots brainless, like aim each one deliberately. Well, that's not so smart if you got somebody in your face, because every time you scope, you move super slowly and predictably, and freaking everything can shoot you. So how do you actually utilize that? So one of the things that I really think is important is that the quick scope is not something you can completely do with Freja, but it definitely helps cut down the amount of time that you're punishable. So for example, this is an actual, I don't know, what's a better character here? A Cassidy, right? If I'm stuck without updraft versus a Cassidy, first off, you're kind of screwed, right? Like you've probably lost the duel here, but if you're gonna win the duel, it's gonna be utilizing your dashes more like Tracer Blinks to reposition. So I might quick scope this here, like bam, as quickly as I can, but then I'm gonna dash to the side, spam my primary fire, quick scope, then dash. And what you can kind of utilize, you can kind of utilize your dash immediately after a quick scope, because they're gonna go, oh, she's scoped in, punishable, then dash to the side, oh, dash to the side, and so on. So you kind of utilize your dashes more like Tracer Blinks and less for just spamming your bolts off of cooldown. Because if I go to the Cassie here and I go like this, I'm probably dead because I'm just basically standing still. I'm disrespecting him. So that's why it's important to utilize the updraft for your bolt spam, because it's what allows you to do it safely, because you're up high and there's the element of surprise. But if you're in somebody's face, you're probably not going to be scoping in and bolt spamming. You're going to have to be a lot more strategic with how you're taking duels. So this is a little bit more of a vague feedback, but basically the concept is that you need to be a little bit more smart with how you're actually utilizing your dashes and your scopes when you're up close and getting dirty with somebody. We didn't go as detailed about tank spam. We'll talk more about that here. But while Freja is really, really good at spamming tanks, I do think that there is a niche example. I'm going to quickly run down the tanks that I think that are really useful at spamming. Winston, really, really good. Without bubble, he just freaking dies. You can even burn Primal Rage. Wrecking Ball, if you have the mechanics for hitting him post-slam, really, really good, especially with the Frostbolt perk. We'll delve more into perks later. Winston Wrecking Ball, I think you can absolutely annihilate. Obviously, Roadhog, Malga especially is really good. But I think this is where things start to get a little bit tricky, because Roadhog, like all the tanks with on-demand mitigation, like Roadhog with Vape, he can cut down the amount of damage that he takes. Ramatra's block, even Doomfist's block, Hazard's block. They feel really succulent and juicy to shoot, and you should be shooting them, but you really shouldn't be shooting into their midst. So in other words, when I see Hazard blocking, if I see Doomfist blocking, if I see Ramatra blocking, if I see Hog vaping, you need to tell your brain, the dopamine receptors, to stop shooting bolts into it, because it's really not worth the dash coolness to just vomit damage onto tanks that sound and feel good, but doesn't actually do all that much damage. The damage reduction is just way too harsh, and it's not worth the cooldown spam. Generally, what I find myself using is I really only dash bolt spam versus tanks that I know I'm actually going to seriously wound, and then I'll be happy to bolt or spam a Roadhog a little bit, or a Roadhog a little bit, or a Hazard a little bit. But once I start to see them use their mitigation, I'm starting to think about, okay, where's my next updraft? Where's my next squishy pick? I see a lot of Frejas in mid to low ranks that just kind of turn their brain off and just punish tank over and over and over again. And while certain tanks are okay at, and other tanks it feels really good, it's honestly not all that useful, especially when you have updraft available. That's your window of opportunity to actually get a kill on a squishy, or at least threaten a kill for some cooldowns. And if you're wasting that on just a tank that's honestly just absorbing all of your attention, it's really just not worth. Then there are certain tanks that are just honestly not really worth your time. Not that I wouldn't shoot them at all, but I would almost never dash spam them unless they've way overextended. These are tanks like Orisa, Diva, Reinhardt shield, Sigma shields, even characters like Junker Queen that can be a little bit trickier to shoot unless you're hitting your shots. Zarya, another one. Either they're harder tanks to shoot, or their shields, or their matrixes, or bubbles. And Freya's not good at shield break, and Freya's also not that good, actually really bad at feeding charge and so on. So I highly encourage you to avoid shooting those tanks when there's something else much more accessible and easy to shoot. You can absolutely bolt a Zarya to force a bubble. You can absolutely punish a Reinhardt who's overextended and whose shield's broken. But if you're finding yourself sitting and staring at a shield, or bubble, or matrix, you probably should be utilizing your dash resets elsewhere. Again, remember the gameplay loop of it's okay to shoot a tank if you don't have dashes and updraft. When you're in between, go for it. You know, just find some pressure anywhere. But when you have CDs and you have an angle available to you, wasting more time and just shooting at a front line that's just going to shrug it off is really just a waste of time. Finding that balance is going to be incredibly difficult, but it is also incredibly important. I want to delve a little bit more into the verticality of how you actually utilize the verticality with her, because I don't think it's super intuitive. We didn't go as detailed about it earlier, which was basically just go up and then dash spam and yeah. But how do you actually build verticality with Freja? So this is a tech that I think it's important to notice, which is going to be scoping during your verticality animation. So if you notice here, there's different levels of verticality. If I just use updraft here, let's go see how high I go. Just up to the floor there, okay? But then if I were to use my scope in the first third or so, like half of a second, first 3/4 of a second of that updraft, watch this. Look how much higher I get. And you can even get higher than that. So basically tapping your scope preserves your momentum and allows you to go higher. So let me do that one more time. I scope, and I get even higher, and you can preserve it so much more than that. Now that doesn't just apply to updraft, it also applies to your regular jump and dash. Just a regular jump, whee, right? There's my spray. But if I jump scope, look how much higher I get. Okay, I dashed there at the end, but you can actually see how much higher that I get here. So jump scope, it's a higher jump. And this applies to your non-directional dash as well. So remember, I'm not pressing any buttons, no WASD. I'm just dashing without pressing any sort of directional input. And there's the, oh, good job, the good height. But what if I dash and scope? More height, and this chains. So what I can do is I can jump just normally, dash, scope, and you can see it just goes on forever and ever and ever and ever. So make sure that you're utilizing it when verticality is really important. The reason this is important is not just for peaking, but also like, let's say I wanted to get to this high ground here and I didn't have my updraft. If I have my dashes, I'm actually pretty sure I can get that. Let me try that again. Yeah, I can get that no problem. So you can get to some crazy heights without updraft, which obviously it means that it costs you all your, so you don't do this during your bolt spam cycle. But if you want to get to a position, make sure that you're utilizing that. Obviously don't do it in the open because you're moving super slowly and super predictably. It's not going to get you out of jail free. It's just more about repositioning yourself. But it's really important that you're leveraging that as much as you possibly can. And we won't go super in detail on it, but there are some crazy extreme roof surfing things that you can do as well. Like the movement tech with this character is actually insane. Just remember to make sure that you're scoping really early during the animation of your jump, dash, and updraft. If you do it too late, it doesn't give you more height. It's only earlier in the animation that you can actually utilize it. While we're on the verticality thing here, we talked obviously about like utilizing the walls here for verticality to kind of give yourself peeker's advantage, but obviously like using your verticality does kind of put you naked in the open. So make sure that when you're using your updraft cycle versus hit scan, that you're doing so near a wall so that you actually have some sort of lateral cover. And finally, I think maybe the most important fundamental here, less tech focus, is you need to know where are enemy threats, where are the enemy positions when you're deciding on your angle. We talked about in the previous thing about how there's so many different positions that you can take with Freja, so deciding in which one can feel a little bit overwhelming. But I really think what simplifies that decision-making process is before the fight starts, like thinking and listing where are people right now, and so where should I go? You may not always fully know like what to do with that information, but if you practice in taking that information and then going with your gut instinct, you'll give yourself a pretty decent feedback loop of how do you actually position with this character. So, okay, Genji's here, Widowmaker's there, what angle should I take? And then allow yourself to just kind of go with your gut and then figure it out from there. Finally, this is gonna be the more techie specific things, and I know there's gonna be a couple of things that I miss here. This character just feels like she's limitless with tech. Two important techs that I think, we'll go over the more minor one really quick and then a more major one, which I think I actually came up with, so pat myself in the back there. One is you not utilizing your scope to let it fully run out. So if you notice here that you can kind of spam your scope here a little bit, but if you utilize your scope here and you let it fully run out, you can't rescope afterwards. Let me actually try and demonstrate that really fast. So when you're trying to like build and hold ridiculous verticality, if I utilize my scope all the way, I can't really rescope. There's an internal cooldown. So what you can kind of do is you can kind of like scope spam and kind of hold the momentum. But if you let the scope go all the way out, all the way until it expires, it puts it onto a cooldown and you can't do it again. So you notice the time slowing effect, you never want to do that to its full duration if you're trying to maintain verticality. So you kind of want to scope, unscope before it does. Don't let it run out. Don't let it run out. Don't let it run out. Right, and that's where you're kind of slow down your fall a little bit. So if you've ever seen like really high level players maintain crazy heights for long periods of time or on roofs, it's because they're not scoping until the time stops. Like right there, it's too late. I messed up. I held it too long. You want to avoid that. And this is the more important tech here. I think this one is really underutilized, and I haven't seen anybody talking about this as much. But if you notice during your bolt spam, it is really easy to like throw yourself off. It's funny, I've actually trained myself to do the tech without thinking about it. So let me try and showcase what it looks like without input. So if I bolt spam here, it's not terrible to dash in midair, right? It's okay, it's not a big problem. But what happens if you dash at ground level? So if I bolt spam at ground level, it throws me up in the air, which is really disorienting. Maybe I'm holding a directional input and it throws me to the side. That's not necessarily bad when you're trying to dodge shots, but what if you're trying to bolt spam without verticality? Let me actually showcase that really fast here. So if I'm trying to bolt spam here and I dash, it's not too bad if I'm looking directly at the floor, but what if I'm aiming over here? It throws off my crosshair just a little bit. You notice that is you're balanced, you're sitting yourself up, which is both a good and a bad thing. It kind of throws off your aim, but then I discovered something. So if you actually S key input when you're doing your dash, it significantly reduces the crosshair displacement when you're utilizing your dash. So watch this. Let me do a couple of dashes here really fast. So scope, dash, scope dash, scope dash. Do you see how tight that was when I was dashing backwards? So anytime that you're not really utilizing your verticality or don't want to be dodging around, you just want to hit a couple of bolts in a row and make it really accurate, utilize the S key, or with controller, it's going to be pulling back on your analog stick, and just look at that. Like that's so much tighter than it would be if I was pressing either no input or W key or to the side. You need to be pulling back. And the reason why that's the case is because movement in Overwatch when you're moving backwards is a lot more constricted. You move slower moving backwards than you do forwards. So if I scope here, look at my crosshair. Look at how little my crosshair does even when I'm doing my scope spam. But if I were to do W key and do the exact same thing, look how disorienting this is. So much more disorienting. It pulls my crosshair up, it pulls it to the side. It's super disorienting. So basically, TLDR, utilize that S key spam whenever you're trying to keep your crosshair really still when you're bolt spamming. Okay, let's actually talk about her perks and maybe a little bit of her matchups and such. I think matchups wise, we're not going to go into the details of a bunch of characters, but essentially Freja hates extremes. She doesn't really love playing versus snipers on hard sniper maps. She doesn't really love playing versus full dive threats on full dive flat maps, right? Genji, Tracer, Sombra are very doable unless it's Flashpoint, right? And everything's super flat and there's nowhere to go. Freja doesn't mind snipers until you're on freaking, Havana third point and there may not be quite enough verticality to outplay a Widowmaker. So really, if you're looking to ban characters or avoid characters, you really want to make sure that you're not playing into those extreme characters on their extremely good maps. She's very flexible. She could play versus anything, but it's not always going to feel super great. In terms of perks, this is going to be a bit of a controversial take here. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about it myself and watching pro players. And I think a lot of the pro players that I've seen that play Freja agree with me. And and this is going to be the real controversial take. I think tracking instinct, critical health enemies are revealed to you, is generally more often better than frost bolts. Let me elaborate. Frost bolt, enemies hit by 3 regular bolts, and by the way, this means her primary fire, not her alternate fire. Enemies hit by 3 regular bolts are slowed by 20% for 2 seconds. So let's talk about why that might be useful. A slow target is easier to hit. A slow target can't get away. A slow target, especially a tank, is often a lot more killable. This perk kind of wrecks tanks that you can spam quite easily. Thinking of Malgas, Winstons, Wrecking Balls, especially Roadhog sometimes as well. Anything that you can easily spam, this perk is, I mean, it's good. It's just straight up very, very good. But this is why I'm a tracking instinct advocate, just a little bit. Critical health enemies are revealed to you. Critical health, it's not elaborated on here in the same way that the Sombra Translocator heal one isn't elaborated. Critical health is under 50%, not 25 or 30 or 10, it's 50%. So a target that's half health is revealed to you behind a wall. Any target at any time. You have wall hacks, and I can one up that. You can actually ping these targets so that your teammates can see where they are behind walls. Now they won't see the outline, but they will see the ping. They'll see what the hero is and where they are. It's just incredibly broken for scouting. It's really useful for information with how you're repositioning, and it's freaking broken in duels because you basically have wall hacks anytime you hit a single bolt on any target that isn't a tank. So I really like the crit health perk. I do find myself occasionally using frost bolts when the map is really flat, doesn't give me a lot of verticality, and their tank is really abusable. So I'm like, all right, they're freaking Wrecking Balls feeding. I'm gonna frostbolt his cheeks and ruin his day. Sorry, tank mains. Occasionally it is fairly good, but I actually think it's more the exception, not the rule. And the vast majority of tank matchups that you're playing, again, we kind of talked about this earlier. Diva, partially Hazard, Orisa, Ramattra, Ryan, Sigma, Zarya, and so on. You're probably not going to need this perk as much. And honestly, there's a good argument to be said that even versus tanks that's useful versus the crit perk is still more useful. So I won't, nail it in stone and say this is 100% the case. I'm just saying that there's a lot more nuance to this argument and your mileage may vary. Finally, the last perk here, and I think this one is probably a little bit simpler. Ready to Hunt updraft grants a temporary free use of quick dash. So this means in your updraft here, you can actually dash again for free. I actually didn't select the perk, but that's what it does. It's really nice. Not only is it good for getting out of jail free quickly, but it's more bolt spam. So you can do, I'll showcase it really quick here. You can utilize your dash, spam, updraft, spam, dash, spam. It's more and more and more in bolts. In fact, I actually didn't even min-max it there. You can basically spam it forever, and it also gives you more verticality as well. It's good for mobility. It's also good for damage output, with the most important aspect of her damage output, her burst damage output through her bolts. Now, the other one is fairly useful as well. It is Relentless Barrage. You're not going to see this, but it direct hits with your scope, refund 4 of your primary fire. So if you're basically just spamming tank, you can bolt, shoot, bolt, shoot, bolt, shoot, and literally infinitely and never reload, which is like, that's pretty nice, especially if you have like the frost arrows things. Like, you could just make tanks just never want to play Overwatch again if it's the wrong tank. But I know, as appealing as that may be, it's only, I find it just more situationally useful if whether you're spamming the tank or not, because the problem is that sounds really good, but it's going to put you in a gameplay loop that may not be the most effective. Like, even if the tank looks like a human porcupine, it may not win you the game depending on the tank. It may just feel really good. So your mileage may vary, but I do find both Frostbolt and especially Relentless Barrage to be much more situational than the other two, which are just very largely useful for doing what she does best, which is taking better angles and actually securing kills. I do encourage you to experiment though. I think perks, there's no real objective truth about anything about perks. I just think experiment and take my advice with a grain of salt. And finally, we get to the point of the guide, which I think is probably the most important, which is going a little bit more in detail about how do you actually play the character and how do we apply all these things. And so I have 3 games here. This is in Diamond 1 and Masters 4 spectrum of range. So there's going to be some good things here that I do. There's going to be some bad things. This is not professional level play, which I think is actually good to review. And what we're going to be looking at is a couple of specific concepts that we looked at in review and how does it actually apply in a real game. So first things first here, we're going to be rolling out an Esperanza. There's a lot of verticality here. What angle, what position do I want to be taking? I'm rolling out with my team. I have full scouting on Echo. Genji's far away. Echo is far away. Doomfist is just disengaged. And so let's actually take a second to pause here. What are my angle options here that utilize verticality, that utilize those longer sightlines? I actually challenge you, if you really want to learn here, to pause right now and try to find 2 or 3 different angles on the map that might utilize some unique aspects of Freja's kit. Okay, if you didn't pause, screw you. No, I'm just kidding. Basically, you could updraft here and look for an angle on down on the Echo, Kiriko, whatever. Again, utilizing that crosshair advantage. I don't need my updraft right now. I can be pretty greedy here. I have full vantage point from this angle here. I can actually walk forward to the information that I have and utilize my updraft here to peek here, or even go really greedy, dash across to here, updraft, very aggressive, right? And look for a couple of bolts on this angle here. You notice that there's a scale of like risk versus reward with all of these angles here, but I actually trolled this here. I play this a little bit too conservatively, even though I had full information, and I'm not really utilizing Freya's kit. I'm playing a little too conservatively. Now that wasn't bad. I got a decent sightline here, but why not walk forward to here and look for a scope spam here, or look for a scope spam here? Again, because this provides me vertical cover and allows me a vantage point onto the enemy backline or the enemy DPS line, then I should be using this architecture. I should be utilizing this architecture right now, and I'm playing too conservatively doing so. So a lot of what you're gonna be doing with Freya whenever the map provides it is be like, what vertical structure could I have used with cover to give myself a vantage point to apply bolt pressure? And crucially, I'm saying that because of the information that I had about where the enemy team is positioned. Now this is another really interesting one here. I've got a nice little vantage point on the sideline. This is something that maybe a Widowmaker could hold safely, but again, it's just very compressed for me. My question is, where do you think that I could have positioned here for risk versus reward? I'll give you a second. So I think there's three options here. I think the first thing here is, I believe, I'm not sure what the ceiling of this map is, but if I utilize my verticality perfectly, I think I can get a couple of bolts up top here. I can also hard flank and go up and over this 100% for a very high risk, high reward angle. Or what if I was all the way with my team? Where would you roll out from here? I think I'd dash, updraft, and look for some shots hugging this verticality here. And again, looking for a more angle pressure onto backline. Maybe saving a dash just in case the Genji decides to go for me. Again, you notice how weird these angles are compared to other characters. Even Pharah may not be able to consistently take these poke positions, but this is exactly what Freya does, and this is exactly what makes her challenging, because if you're doing what I'm doing here, you're just not utilizing the full aspect of her kit. Okay, next up we have a Runasapi, basically a completely different situation. From where I'm at right now, I'm walking forward. I'll give you guys some context. My team is coming back from spawn. This is a 5v5. I've just seen the Brigitte go into the small room here, and I have a full vantage point off of where she is. Now, I use one bolt to get an explosive hit off of the floor. By the way, whether I hit that or not, the explosive blast radius is going to hurt her. And you can probably guess what I'm going to do with my ultimate here. I know where she is. I'm not going to hesitate. Use the ult, zone her out, she's dead. That's a good ultimate, if I do say so myself. Even if it doesn't hit there, it forces zoning value that's going to guarantee the kill. Do not hold your ultimate. Look for opportunities and be decisive with how you're utilizing it. Now, this is where I start to screw up just a little bit. I open up my angle a little bit to the left here, but again, I got to ask the question, while this is an okay sightline, what is uniquely Freya about this position? Well, not really anything. In fact, if Sojourn builds a rail here, I might die. I'm kind of standing in the open versus a hit scan that has more consistent range than me. So let's pause this again. Where is the verticality that I could be utilizing right now, even on a relatively flat map? I think the answer is pretty obvious. If I had taken this opportunity to rotate to dash here and then updraft from this vertical cover here, this not only gives me a vantage point onto Roadhog, but more importantly, gives me an element of surprise for a couple of dash spams onto Sojourn. And again, with where her crosshair is, she's not going to be expecting that. And even if she does, she's really not 100% certain where I'm going to be peeking. And this gives me a splash advantage. This gives me an opportunity to win the duel, and to win so, please don't updraft in the open like I just did. Updraft along a vertical cover on the side. One of the challenges that I had with this character is that I'm big with the angles, right? I love angles. I'm really good with generally finding open angles for different hit scan characters, even if my aim is bad. The problem with Freya, as I've mentioned many times already, is that you need to think not just laterally, you need to think vertically. For example, right now, I'm opening up my angle to the left to get better sightlines for vision, right? Swinging wide, all right, good angle. But again, you kind of, for those of you who may know, look at the Sojourn right now. She's got rail. Is this the best Freya position? This would be good for Sojourn. This might be good for Ashe or Widow, maybe even Hanzo, but this is not the best Freya position. So let's pause it again. What are two positions that are unique to Freya that would make a lot of sense with the information that I have right now? So the first one is to updraft to a position, which would be to take this high ground right here, where I have a pretty decent vantage point off of the enemy team. Element of surprise, a little bit of crossfire, can dash spam or just primary fire spam from there, no problem. The other one, which you can probably guess where I'm going with this, is to hug, again, the vertical cover here, updraft, and then dash spam onto either the Sojourn, Juno, Kiriko, Reaper, or Hog from this position here. Now, I would definitely be going for backline here. Now, a lot of you may get asking, what is all this about vertical angles? What is the big deal of angles? Value of a horizontal angle, kind of going off to the side or providing crossfire, is that you split split the enemy team's attention in two different directions. You deny them cover. Like for example, this Reaper thinks that he's safe behind Robot, but if I take this vertical angle here or this horizontal angle, he doesn't have it. And then in addition, it gives me more vantage point onto better targets that aren't just the enemy tank. So I can actually pressure squishies that otherwise feel inaccessible. If you notice, going up in all of these situations has provided all the value that a sideways angle does. Going up is an angle. It is a crossfire, and it provides all the benefits that a normal lateral angle provides. And so as you can see, while I'm opening up my angle, I'm not doing so in a way that's unique to Freja, and I'm risking my life while I'm doing so. It's so important that you recognize either the positions that you can utilize with your verticality or just simply the walls that you can utilize for a different peak angle, and that you're marrying that to your bolt spam over and over and over again. Last little detail here off of this map before we move in. I do think it's important to note that obviously when you're updraft and bolt spamming that you don't always have that available. It is a 10-second cooldown. So your cycle of taking that vertical angle might be on quite a long timer. As we said, tempo character, big burst of value, like right now, big burst, big burst, big burst, big burst. But there's an important question. Is there something really serious happening right now? The answer is not really, right? We're still pushing payload. There's no serious fight. So was it wise of me to use my updraft here before the fight even started? Probably fine, because I'll have about 10 seconds before the fight starts, but I do encourage you higher level players to be a little bit thoughtful about when you're going for your vertical angle, when you're going for your bolt spam, and not just doing it off of cooldown. All right, we'll go over a final map here, which is going to be Hollywood. So you can kind of see here, I'm kind of using my bolt spam from the top left. I believe Widowmaker was banned, so I felt safe to do this. And now I'm thinking, okay, so where are my vertical angles here? So I've got an option here. I can kind of hold a more conservative angle and go up over the roof here. But I really wanted to try some roof gliding here, which means a lot of downtime. Like I'm not doing any damage right now, but when I get the opportunity, I think I actually messed it up here. Yeah, I messed it up. This stuff is hard, man. This is hard. But when I get the opportunity, there's going to be a huge window here for an actual kill here. Let me showcase that real quick. So the fight, I mean, you could look at this. I mean, look how free this is. Like, even if I miss my shots here, like they have no expectation that I'm coming from the top ropes here. And this isn't like some crazy fancy tech. This is just how Freja needs to be played. And you can see that even misses here, big explosive damage. And I actually think I hit each of them, which is not good. You want to hit two in the same target. But these guys are dead. Like there's absolutely no way that they can get out from that because they had no idea it was there. So me and my Winston both are able to follow up off of it, no problem. And yeah, now I try the same thing here, but I make a crucial mechanical error, more of a micro error. When you're opening with your ultimate, you want to open with your ultimate because it's so freaking loud, it gives yourself away. So right here, I have my ultimate, and I'm like, oh, Ana's naked, I should go for Ana. The problem is that I've shot a bolt first, and so I reminded her, hey, remember, jackass, I'm here. I shouldn't have done that. Either I should have gone for the bolts or used the ultimate. Instead, I give her a warning shot and then ultimate. Not something you want to do. Either just dry open with ultimate on the slow target, or just bolt spam and hold the ultimate for a later fight, because I actually end up missing this. So I'm just gonna kind of like let this fight play out on the left side. I'm utilizing this left side because of the vertical cover that this little structure right here gives me. It gives me a vantage point onto high ground. You might be asking, why am I not playing high ground right now? It's because I already have basically my entire team on high ground. So if I want to open up a different angle, me stacking on top of here would mean that we just get surrounded, wouldn't have a lot of vision. So I kind of open up to the side here. It gives me a slightly different vantage point, but still gives me that verticality that I'm looking for. I'm shooting that Sigma, shooting that Tracer. My supports can see me. I'm punishing that soldier, clear him out, force the angle out. Notice that I could have been dumping damage into the Sigma's shield, but it was more important to me in forcing the soldier out. Again, it's one of those tank matchups. If this was a Winston walking forward, I probably would be dumping bolts into Winston because of the tank matchup. But as soon as the soldier's out, well, then I can go back and shoot Sigma, poke him out, no problem. Soldier repeaks again, but guess what? I've got my updraft, so guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to updraft. Up top, 1, 2, miss both of my shots and embarrass myself live in camera. But the key point is that I forced attention. I had an opportunity there to force the soldier out off of my updraft cooldown. And I'm still holding here, still utilizing this verticality. Updraft coming up again. As my tank goes in, I walk forward. Soldier, and this is like one of those moments where we talked about the key point of knowing where your threats are. I thought I forced soldier out. I didn't because I missed all my shots, so I actually lose the duel here. But that's a situation where if I play that one correctly, I absolutely win that duel. So I'm gonna give you guys a demonstration of my first point attack here as well. I actually think I play it pretty meh in terms of like the individual details, but the spirit was there. That's what we love about our coach, right? So you can probably see, where am I going to utilize my verticality? Well, kind of an obvious answer here, right? I've got a surprise peek. You notice I time it off of my Winston's engage. If I wasn't playing with Winston and my Orisa was trading on the choke, this is a perfect time to go for it as well. You don't need a dive tank. You just need a distraction, whether that's your tank or something else. And so look at where the Sojourn's aiming her crosshair, right? Like she doesn't know where she's going. I think she's, okay, the Winston just dove. And so I'm going to miss my bolts here, but I just hit one. And that's really all I need. One bolt, that's going to put her low. That's going to force support attention. That's going to keep her out of the space. and you can see between my Winston and one bolt from me, because I suck, I shoved these supports into a locker, I shoved the DPS into the locker, and then now while I'm waiting for my cooldown, I turn my attention to the Orisa. I see Fortify, but it doesn't matter, the damage has been done, and then now I'm going to use my updraft to take a better vantage point, but not just to take high ground, it's also going to be to, you guessed it, bolt spam. Now I can just kind of play passively, wait for my opportunity to get my next updraft. I could have here utilized my updraft here to go for a couple of shots here, but I chose not to. Now there's one more fight I'm going to highlight here, which is again going to talk about the importance of not lateral thinking here. Again, the verticality here is pretty obvious. You're going to utilize your updraft here to give yourself a really nice vantage point, and this was a pretty big play for me. Gets the casting off. I don't know if it actually kills him, but gives us a lot of space here. But then from this position here, I already basically have my updraft again, and so you could probably think, where should I go? Well, I should probably take the high ground here. I can open up my angle here. Maybe I could go here, right? But I'm thinking too much like a traditional hit scan here. I'm thinking open up a lateral angle up to the side, but I'm not doing anything uniquely Freya. Literally basically any hit scan character position here would do more damage than I am. It's just not good verticality. So I do rotate back up across, but it's downtime and it's wasted time. So while I do take the verticality, I should have been here 3 or 4 seconds ago. And you can look at all the options that I could have shot down from this position. So I cannot emphasize enough, you must be leveraging your verticality when the map gives you those options. And when the map doesn't give you those options, leverage your verticality to at least win duels, right? To surprise people up from the top. You may not hit your shot every single time, but at least you get your opportunities to surprise the enemy team and be able to pop off in different moments. And so, like, basically every time I found myself messing up with this character, it's because I was screwing up that fundamental. And it's really important that you're utilizing it in basically every duel that you possibly can. So that's going to kind of wrap it up. I'll kind of like let this play in the background here as I'm fumbling my brains out here. We actually did win this, which is nice. But yeah, Freya, it's all about, oh, this is great. This is embarrassing. It's all about verticality. It's all about timing those tempos, those bursts of pressure, and then being careful and cognizant, very deliberate with how you're aiming your bolts. Basically using the cooldowns when you have them, but not rushing it so much that you're missing literally every single bolt. I'm going to be honest with you guys. It took me a long time to get the mechanics of this character down. I'm a old wash coach. I haven't played the game consistently in a long time, so that's obviously the major problem. But I think even for people that are okay mechanically, you might have some issues with aiming with this character. Be patient, focus on the positioning aspect, and as I said, really focus on slowing down the bolt process, and it will come. You will eventually get it here. Remember that it's not just Ashe, it is an Ashe with a flight, and so if you're not flying with your Ashe, you're not going to win. If you're not utilizing your range where you can, you're not going to win. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'll try to get to them. There's so much information in this character. I feel like this video drug on a little bit too long, but I feel like anything less than that would be too short. I do want to highlight that I do think that if you go to the structure of this video of like the fundamentals of what you need to focus on, and just focus on that for new players, that's probably good enough. And then you can kind of scale yourself up depending on how high of a rank you are. So once you've got the fundamentals, you can start to focus on the tech. Once you've got some of the tech, you can start to get to the tiny little details, and then you can go from there. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.